Hello, trapped at home so long. I'm sewing Simplicity 8528 men's suit jacket. So I am using twill. It's a pant weight twill, so I'm not going to underline it with anything. I do have it interfaced, the pieces that call for it. All of my pieces are cut out. I've notched them, I've marked them. I'm just gonna start sewing. So first off, I'm gonna start by stay stitching the neck to make sure that it doesn't stretch out while I'm messing around with it. All right, I'm gonna take my side front and match it to my front. I'm gonna match up those notches and sew it. All right, next I'm going to prep the pockets. So on this fold line, I went ahead and cut a little notch where it folds. First, I'm just gonna serge the edge of this, make it look nice. All right, I've got the pocket edges serged. Just going to fold them over at the fold line, inside out. I mean, folding the wrong side over the right side. And I'm going to sew the edges here. All right, I've got the pockets sewn, and I'm going to clip the edges up to, but not through the stitching. So I'm gonna turn these bad boys to the outside. I'm gonna take my point turner. All right, so now I can see beginnings of where my seam allowance is gonna fold to. Turn my seam gauge to 5/8 and throw some pins around the outside edge of that pocket. I'm gonna start with the straight edges because it's a little easier to pin those. The curves will get a little bit more difficult. And with the curve, I'm just pushing down the middle here, pushing the seam gauge in there until I hit the 5/8, throwing a pin there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and press it. All right, I have a pocket. I'm going to sew the hem of the pocket. Got my pockets pressed. Now I'm going to press the seams that I sewed between the front and the side panel. Now I'm going to attach pockets to the front. There's a drill hole there, and then there's a drill hole in the side. I have to look close to see them. I punched them with my awl while I was cutting. I'm going to throw a couple of pins into it, and then I'm going to stitch close to the edge, and I'm going to press it. These are my fronts. I'm going to move on to my backs. The first thing I'm going to do is stay stitch the necks there. I'm stay stitching at about 3/8 of an inch. Don't want it to interfere with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, but I want it to be in far enough that it's going to not allow the neck to stretch out. Next, I'm going to sew the center back seam, match it at the notches. The triple notch there, you want to make sure that those line up, make sure the tops match and the bottoms meet. Now I'm going to press the center back seam open. And now I can sew the fronts and the backs together. I'm going to start at the shoulder seams. And the shoulder seams both have 2 notches, one on the inside and one on the outside. I'm going to line those up, and I'm just going to throw a pin in them. I'm going to ease the back to match the front. So if you'll notice, the back is slightly bigger. As we sew it, just stretch it a little bit to make them match. I'm also going to match up the side and throw a couple pins in there. So I'm matching up my notches here, and then I'm going to match the drill hole from the front to the back. So this little step out is going to be the pleat. We're not going to sew from here down. So when I put a pin right there where my drill hole is. Now I'm going to start sewing here. So up to here, I'm going to sew the shoulder seams and then sew down the other side. Move the iron and press the seams open. Okay, and then I'm going to press the back seams open up till the pleat. Then at the pleat, I'm going to clip into, but not through the seam line. Fold the allowance over so the seam will go down, and then your pleat will all be folded towards the back of the garment. And I'm throwing a couple of pins in just for a moment. Once I go to actually press it, I'm going to take the pins out so there's not divots from those. Do the same for this side. Okay, now I've got those pressed. I'm going to go back and serge along the insides of these pleats just so it looks a little bit more finished, because the pleats might open as you're wearing it and you want it to look kind of nice. Alright, and now I'm going to fold it back the way it was when I pressed it. Those little steps matching up. Throw a little pin up in this top edge. And I'm going to stitch just a little angle stitch from this seam over to the pin on the outside just to hold and reinforce that. We're just going to set that aside for a little bit. Work on the collar and the sleeves. Got the collar pieces here. Got a top collar and an under collar. I'm going to match these two up, and the instructions that I've got say to sew down the side and then around and then back up. I'm going to do it slightly different. So I'm going to sew the outside edge first, and since the top collar is a little bit longer than the under collar, I'm going to sew with the under collar up, kind of ease it on to the top collar as much as I can. Okay, I have the outside edge done. Since it's only about 1/4 of an inch total, it's not that hard to ease the top collar onto the under collar. The next thing I'm going to do is press them open. Okay, they're pressed open. And then I'm going to push all of that seam allowance towards the under collar. So one of the things I did to kind of help myself out while I was doing this was I labeled a T on my top collar, which looks like I ironed off, and I labeled a U on my under collar so I'd remember which is which. I'm going to push all that seam allowance to this side, and then I'm going to understitch on the under collar side, just about 1/8 of an inch away from my seam allowance. And when I'm doing that, I'm really pressing these away from each other as I'm doing that edge stitch to make sure that I don't lose any of that shaping that's built into the outer neckline of the piece. So what the understitch does is it holds that seam allowance in there and makes it really easy to turn the collar. Now that I've done that, I'm going to fold the side and sew down the sides. Go ahead and clip the corner and trim off that seam allowance from understitching the under collar. I'm just going to finger press these open and then flip around. Go ahead and press it, and then I'm going to stay stitch it along the edge just to keep it so it's not flopping around. Alright, I've got the collar done. I'm going to pin that onto the neck, making sure that the top collar is facing up. So if you can see that edge stitching or the understitching here, don't put it in that way. Flip it, and then I've got a drill hole up here that I can see. I can match the collar to up there. You know, I've got some notches on my collar. They're a little hard to see because of the interfacing. So I can see there's one right here. I'm gonna match that to the notch at the back and to the other notch at the back. I'm going to go ahead and pin that center back seam open. So if I do run over it, hopefully it won't fold it over and it'll just lay a little bit more flat. And I'm going to match the front edges up, throw a couple of pins along there. Also going to pin this seam allowance open. I'm going to find the drill on this side and match that up to the edge of the collar here. Throw a pin in there, and then finishing pinning along the other front edge. Now I'm going to sew the collar in. Okay, now I'm going to look at the underside of my seam and make sure that I didn't make any bubbles. Like I've got one there, and I've got one there. And take my tiny, tiny little scissors and cut out before and after. Yeah, it looks like there's a few spots. Okay, I'm going to go back and re-sew those spots that I just cut open and kind of tease the fabric down nicely so there's no lumps or bubbles. going in and I'm using my awl when I'm sewing over the parts again to just kind of push down while I'm sewing to help ease it. I want to make sure I'm not using this to stab through the fabric, but kind of using it as an extra fingernail or something to kind of help guide the fabric through. It can get in there a little bit better than your fingers can. Holding the collar along the roll line. Just kind of get it used to where it's going to want to lay anyway once it's on the body. Okay, next we're going to move on to the sleeve. I've got a top sleeve and an undersleeve. Okay, I'm going to pin the undersleeve to the top sleeve, matching at the notches and matching the edges. Next, we're going to press both of these seams open, and then I'm also going to serge along the opening edge. Now I'm going to ease stitch from this drill around the top of this drill, and we'll be using that to ease the sleeve cap into the armhole. Okay, I did 2 rows, one at 1/4 of an inch and one at 1/2 inch, and we'll use those to ease the sleeve into the armhole. I'm going to pin in the sleeve, matching notches and drill holes. There's a drill hole on the undersleeve here, and then there's a drill hole on the body right here on the side panel. Just match those up, and then match the notches up. And I'm pinning up to where the ease stitching is in the sleeve. Then I'm going to match the drill at the top of the cap to my shoulder seam. This pin I'm just putting in the shoulder seam to hold it open, just like I did with the collar. I'm going to work my way around the front part of the sleeve and matching up the notches, drill holes. I'm going to pull the threads on the inside of the sleeve to pull that stitching. I can use that to ease the sleeve into the armhole. A little bit of easing. Throw a few pins in there. And I'm also going to use the awl when I'm sewing to help make sure I'm not catching big blobs of it and to kind of help smooth it out while I'm sewing it. I'm going to do the same thing on the back sleeve. Next, I'll serge the armholes just so they'll look a little bit nicer and they won't hang up on your shirt when you're trying to put it on. Okay, I also went ahead and serged the bottom edge while I was there. That'll make it easier once we go to hem it. I'm going to go ahead and take my back facing and serge around the outside edge to make sure that that inner facing doesn't go anywhere. Okay, grab the front facing and I'm going to take both of them and serge the long edge so it'll match with the edge of the back facing. Now I'm going to sew the front and back facings together at the shoulder seam, matching up the notches. Again, they're fused, so it's a little hard to see the notch. Let's start with the jacket down, the collar facing up. Matching drills. shoulder seams. Notches. All right, then we will sew around. And I'm going to start at this edge where the serging is and work my way around. Okay, now we're going to clip corners. I'm going to trim a bit of the seam allowance, the fusible on it, taking off about a 1/4 inch. I'm also going to go through and trim the collar. And I'm going to clip my curves. And do the same here. I'm going to clip 2, but not through the seam line. And I'm going to finger press this a little bit, just trying to make sure that there's no lip where the seam is. So when I go to press it, I'll make sure that I'm pressing it so it looks nice once it's on. Do the same thing to the other side. And I'm going to press it really well. Okay, got the facing put in. Starting to look like a jacket. Now we're going to attach shoulder pads. Place them on the cap of the shoulder. And I'm just going to hand sew it in a couple of places. So at the top of the cap, at each edge, and then at the top of the curve on the shoulder pad to just the seam allowance in the shoulder. Then I'm going to fold the facing over the shoulder pad and tack the facing to the shoulder pad. And we'll do the same with the other side. The last step is hemming the sleeves. So they've got a 1.5 inch hem. Got it turned inside out and turning up the hem. Use my trusty seam gauge. And I'm going to pin it down a little bit from the serging. I'm going to blind hem so that will help when I'm folding it. I'm going to blind hem it now with it folded like this. And the sides will be easy to hem because I can just line it up with where the facing finished. Should be about 1.5 inches. Go to the seam, measure that. Again, I'm going to pin a little bit down from the edge so I can flip it and blind hem it. Okay, and the back, because it's got the pleat folded in, I'm going to keep that pleat folded in while I fold it up. I'm going to fold in this corner just a touch. And just kind of angle it towards the very tip of the corner. It's almost like I'm mitering it. And then when I attach it, it's going to be offset from the edge a little bit. It'll make it look nice and clean on this side. All right, now hem. Now we press it. All right, it's a jacket. Just need to do the buttons, buttonholes, it gets cuff buttons, and thanks for joining me today.